Hey everyone, Elias here with We Aim for Self-Defense. Want to just have a little discussion with you all. Been having some discussions with friends of mine, um, and watching a lot of videos the last couple of years. And there's always a need for debate and discourse for people that are making content, especially those who do it for a living, right? So you need to have debate. One of the most common debates are people that are arguing. That I've found as a newly armed person are online, are people arguing about manual safeties on pistols and on semi-automatic pistols, and whether or not they're good or bad. And mostly what I see, either as the focus of a video, foci videos, or just discussed in passing, from my observations, my small sample selection as a consumer of content, are people saying, manual safeties nowadays in 2024 are silly on pistols. In fact, they can actually be really dangerous. So let's talk about that for a second. If you're new like me, first of all, we have an empty pistol here. There's nothing in it. There's no one behind me, to the right, left, or in front of me. I don't even have a magazine in here. So this is clean. This is clear and safe. This is a semi-automatic pistol. Semi-automatic pistol is not a revolver. It's a striker-fired pistol. It doesn't have a hammer that you can cock, or that you'll see cock and fire. Has a different mechanism in there. A striker-fired pistol it is. This is a type of gun that has a manual safety. You'll see this little switch. Put it up. That means it's safe, and I try as I might, I can't pull that trigger. If I turn that down, I can pull the trigger, okay? This isn't the only type of safety that's in this pistol. It also has this little trigger safety where if I were to try from a side to pull the trigger, or the other side, or lower, or all the way up high, I wouldn't be able to. I have to compress this inner part here on the trigger, as well as the kind of the outer shell here. All right, that's a safety. Supposedly this has mechanisms inside that make it drop safe, meaning it won't just fire if it's loaded and there's a round in the chamber, which there isn't one now. If it were to fall or be hit from the side, you actually have to pull the trigger, and this trigger safety makes that difficult. It does. I have dropped this pistol in testing it. It hasn't fired. So there's nowadays many semi-automatic pistols have internal safety mechanisms, and many of them, but not all, have these trigger safeties as well. But not all of them, maybe not even the majority, have these manual safeties. You'll see these on older style pistols like 1911s. You'll see them on newer ones like the so-called 2011s as well, but not many have these. You can get them, not get them. Mostly, again, what I'm seeing out there, people saying that they're unnecessary, they're superfluous. Sometimes people are saying they're even dangerous. I know there's very popular pistols out there that have manual safeties. Let's say like the Smith & Wesson Shield Plus. You can get it with manual safety. I've never seen a video of someone who has one with a safety that doesn't point out that they don't even use that safety, the external manual safety. I've never met anyone who has it, who's fired them, that says they use it. Everyone makes a big point that I've seen of saying they don't use the safety, right? And there's reasons why. And many popular types of firearms, of pistols in particular, like all of the types of Glocks. Glock is an Austrian firearm maker, and they make pistols, and it's named after their founder. Excuse me. All of those have internal safeties, and others, some like trigger safeties, but none of them have this manual safety. They just don't do it, right? There is nothing wrong, as far as I understand it, as a beginner, and nothing particularly prohibitive in terms of not being safe, and firearms are always dangerous, with carrying a modern pistol that doesn't have a manual safety, right? If you do your best to follow the safety rules of firearms, if you have really good holsters, if you practice holstering and unholstering and drawing your gun properly, if you're always looking when you reholster, if you keep your finger off the trigger unless you intend to fire at something. All these types of things make it, as far as I can see, completely safe to carry a pistol that doesn't have this type of additional external manual safety, right? That you have to disengage in order to fire. I, however, still as a newly armed person, prefer pistols that have manual safeties. Not all of mine do. I have some that I carry that don't. Those happen to be double action, or at least have a double action element to them. So they're longer pulls. All right, I'll show you what I mean. This right here, longer break. If I put it in the single action, it's a quicker break. You can't really tell, but there's less friction. Excuse the ambient noise, please. Those are harder to engage a trigger as well. Those are carry. But my preference is to have pistols and carry pistols, at least, that have this manual safety. So I want to talk about my reasons why. Like I said, there's nothing wrong with carrying a pistol that doesn't have manual safety, as far as I can tell, at all. If you're smart, if you do your best to train, if you to ingrain the safety rules into you, there's nothing wrong with that. I am not arguing that you should carry pistols exclusively that have manual safeties. I want to talk about why I, despite everything I've seen, everything I've heard as a new shooter, still prefer this. Reason number one, it's just what I'm comfortable with, and that is fine as a new shooter. There's a number of reasons I'm more comfortable with it. I think the first reason is just I'm new. I'm new to shooting. I'm even newer to carrying, right? And I think the longer I go carrying a pistol every day without shooting myself in the leg or the foot, God forbid, I think I'll be more comfortable, right? And I can see one day carrying pistols like Glocks that don't have manual safeties. I could totally foresee that, right? I have so much respect for the responsibility and the danger of pistols, and I really try to have an active respect that I could see myself, while maintaining that respect, getting more comfortable with it. But my initial posture is to overly respect it. I have zero problem with that. I have zero problem with overly respecting the potential for these to do harm to myself, to others, and an added layer of safety, this manual safety, simply making it harder to shoot feels right for me, and that's fine. And I could end the video there. If you're a new shooter like me, a newly armed person, I could say, hey, if that makes you feel better, good enough reason, don't worry about what anyone's saying. That's reason number one, and I think it's the only reason anyone would need. You have to be comfortable, and if that comfort level comes out of like a bit of like over cautiousness around guns, great. I don't think you actually can be overly cautious. The reality is we're more likely to harm ourselves for any number of reasons, accidental and darker with pistols, than we are to have to use it in self-defense. So having an abundance of caution to me seems appropriate, and I don't think you could ever have too much caution if you have a certain mindset, at least from my perspective. Another reason I'm more comfortable is, hey, you know what? I haven't been around guns my whole life. It just so happens that the first guns I started learning on had manual safeties. First one was a Walther pistol, 22 long rifle, chambered in 22 long rifle, the 22 long rifle caliber. And very first one I started practicing with, it had a manual safety. The very first pistol that I bought for myself also had a manual safety. What does that mean? Well, it means from scratch, from my beginning, I started learning to use pistols with manual safeties. What does that mean? It means that I started from the start, from the very first time I started learning anything about a pistol. Where to point it safely, how to take ammunition out, how to load it, how to clean it. It was with pistols that had manual safety. So same deal. When I would practice drawing, I would practice disengaging the safety. When I would practice presenting, it was after I had done so. And shooting, when I was done shooting, I was practicing engaging the safety and then reholstering, right? All of my practice began with guns with manual safeties. It might be the case, I haven't kept up with reps, that most of my practice still as a newly armed person and an even newer carrier has been with pistols like this that have manual safeties. What is that to say? That is to say, I'm used to it. A lot of times, I think a lot of the people that are really opposed to manual safeties didn't start on guns with manual safeties. And that's fine. They're not used to it, so it's an extra step and they're worried about it, right? No problem. For me, that's what I started learning on, and it pairs well with my abundance of caution as a newer shooter to still prefer that. That's reason number two. So, the folks, if you're not as online as me and not watching these videos, and if you don't have as many folks that you're talking to that are more experienced as armed people and shooters and practice shooters, you may not be familiar with some of the objections to manual safety. I may have presented to you a decent case for why carrying a manual safety makes sense. Here's some of the things, most common things I see. People say, hey, you know what? It's one more thing that you have to do. In fact, you really have to train to effectively use a safety if you want to be able to use it in a very unlikely, statistically speaking, self-defense scenario. Because it's not just a matter of pulling your garment up, getting your pistol out, acquiring your sight, stance, breathing, what have you, assessing the situation around you, behind your target, and then pulling a trigger. You also have to disengage that safety. Otherwise, if the safety's still engaged, oh no, it won't fire, right? So they're worried that when it comes time to draw the gun and shoot 20 bad guys, that the time it takes to do that will be one, that it will take too much time, right? Even if they remember, it'll add to their time to defend themselves, and that's scary. And two, what I hear most often is you're just going to forget. Under stress, you're going to forget. You're so stressed that you're going to forget to do this when you do that and then shoot, right? Certainly that's possible. They say it takes extra training. My immediate response to that was, and it's still my response now, a couple of years in, is that extra training doesn't sound like a bad thing. Even more controversially, well, actually, maybe I'll get to that in a second. Extra training doesn't sound like a bad thing to me, right? The extra training it takes to do that, and then look around, click it, put it back in to make sure it's safe on the reholster, extra safe, in addition to me paying attention. That doesn't sound like a bad thing to me, because if I'm practicing that, I'm also going to practice my draw, my reholster, my sight acquisition. I'm going to be practicing everything more if I practice that, right? It doesn't sound like a bad thing, especially because we're talking about stressful situations. You know what else takes presence of mind and practice, that develops reflex, or reflex that comes from practice? Everything else. You'll also fumble with your shirt if you don't practice enough. You'll also fumble drawing correctly. You'll also fumble with sight acquisition. You'll fumble, you might tremble, right? Like these, I would imagine there's a whole bunch of adrenaline going on, and fear and stress and all that type of stuff, right? So everything takes practice. The manual safety is not something, disengaging and engaging is not something that magically takes more practice than every other thing you need to do with your pistol, if God forbid you have to use it. Now, they will say, well, obviously, yeah, sure, right, but it's an unnecessary step because modern pistols may have things like these trigger safeties. They'll have internal safeties that make it drop safe, and firing pin safeties, all sorts of things that make it safer, so it's unnecessary. Again, I'm not saying that they are necessary for you or for everyone. I think you can carry modern pistols safely that don't have manual safeties. However, I don't like I object to the idea of them saying it's just impossible and to safely, and just as safely, use a pistol in self-defense, or prepare to use a pistol for self-defense if it has a manual safety, right? I just think that doesn't make sense. Their main argument is it takes more training. I think I want more training, especially as a new shooter. I think if this gives me more pause before I carry because I have to train this manual safety, I like that, because I'm going to be nervous in that situation, I guess, as nervous with or without manual safety. I have to do a number of things correctly with or without a manual safety in order to effectively use this pistol. So I think more training is not an argument against it. I think we should always be looking for reasons to do more and more and more training. And I'll tell you what, now we'll get a little bit more controversial stuff perhaps. If I'm a person that is so afraid when I draw, in the very unlikely scenario that I have to use it in self-defense, depending on who you are and what happens in your life, it may or may not be unlikely, as more or less unlikely, right? More or less unlikely. But most of us won't ever have to, thankfully, right? But in that scenario, if I'm the type of person that is so nervous that disengaging the safety is what's going to get me, I'm probably going to get caught up other places. I probably didn't do everything perfectly and seamlessly. I probably am not ready to use that pistol effectively in self-defense, regardless of whether or not I have a safety, because other things can go wrong. I'm not nervous. I might not assess the situation correctly. I might not be assessing threats correctly. I might be doing it prematurely, which I want to get to in a second. I might be more likely to miss. More practice is a good thing. If a manual safety, like everyone says, requires more practice, to me that's a plus, not a negative. Sadly, the world is dangerous, but it's not so dangerous that the external threats are statistically from firearms are more likely than the threats we provide to ourselves and others.
Everyone, little wardrobe change before finishing this video. Yeah, long story short, in the car now, finishing this up, right? So, I don't think, and this is where I may differ with a lot of people, I don't think it's super necessary that I or anyone else gets a gun in their hands and carrying with them constantly as soon as possible, with the least amount of training as possible. I don't agree with that. I understand from like a special interest group perspective, it makes sense to get as many people owning and carrying guns as possible to pursue your agenda. You know, that's a separate discussion. I'll let political scientists and special interest group specialists in that regard debate that. In terms of safety, in terms of the reason why I don't think it's a bad idea to carry pistols that have manual safeties, and why I, as a new carrier, still feel most comfortable carrying those, I'm more concerned with danger, right? I think it's more important that, for me, that I have, honestly, more barriers, if the barriers are training, not the government or society. I have more barriers to carrying through training than less. I think it's more important to me that I have more barriers to firing and than ease of access, right? I really think that a lot of people are focused on the least likely scenario, the dangers of the least likely scenario. The least likely scenario for most of us is that we will have to draw and fire our guns in self-defense during our lifetime. A far more statistically likely danger, I feel, would be, and I know it's weird to put statistics and feeling together, but this is very subjective. I know this for a fact. I know I will draw and reholster my gun just through practicing, even when it's loaded with one in the chamber, more than I will ever, I'll put money on this, ever have to draw it in self-defense in the real world. So by exponentially, by magnitudes, right? So I like to carry a gun with one in the chamber, so that if I ever need to use it, I don't have to load it or rack it to chamber a round from a loaded magazine. It's in the pistol, then it's ready to go. My compromise with that oftentimes is the manual safety in addition to that. So I just flip it and I'm ready to fire, God forbid if I need to, all right? As opposed to racking it, even with no safety. I feel like I found that takes me more time in practice. I have to reholster, and I reholster my gun more often than I will ever have to draw it and use it in self-defense. By a lot, in terms of repetitions. It seems to me that one of the bigger dangers in terms of negligent discharge and accidentally firing your gun is if you are reholstering and you mess up and there's a piece of clothing that gets caught in the trigger guard and pulls in the trigger as you press downward, right? You have a pulling and pushing situation going on and it fires into your leg, into your butt, or what have you. I usually carry in a way that I'm especially worried about a bullet going into my body. Because I am reholstering with a loaded and a gun with a round chambered way more often than I'm ever drawing in self-defense, it is more likely, statistically speaking, maybe it's because I'm a big idiot, that I just statistically speaking will accidentally shoot myself. Okay, the manual safety will mitigate that risk. If I train myself before reholstering to flip the manual safety on, even if I get some clothing caught in there, it's not going to fire. I think people are more obsessed with scenarios that are far less likely to occur, and that's their need to shoot people in self-defense, and they forgot to disengage their safety. That's just not as likely as you reholstering your gun. Now, of course, if you do everything perfectly, you shouldn't need the manual safety. If you don't make any mistakes, you shouldn't need it, right? If the gun doesn't fire on its own, like 6 hours P320 was just ruled to have, the judges ruled an award to someone who claims that the gun shot off on its own without him pulling the trigger. And there's been a number of lawsuits they've settled. This person has just been awarded millions of dollars as well. Maybe that stuff will never happen to you. An added layer through a manual safety is not a bad idea in my view to mitigate those risks, right? I'm trying to be obsessed not with the most dramatic scenarios, but the most likely scenarios. What am I doing more often than drawing my gun in self-defense, which I've never had to do, is reholstering. Right? So that's something that makes me more comfortable as a newer shooter. I imagine the more years I go without shooting myself in the leg, the more comfortable I'll be with carrying a gun that doesn't have a manual safety. I think that's completely fine as well. Something else that I think, if we're going to talk about really bad scenarios, really statistically unlikely scenarios, but scariest scenarios, one that has come to mind for me that I feel the manual safety might potentially theoretically help me out with is if you're in a grappling scenario and your gun gets loose, someone pulls it out, they're defending you, you're defending yourself. The grappling scenario is not a sporting one. Someone's attacked you, you're defending yourself, and your gun gets out, or they get your gun. If you carry it loaded and chambered and ready to go, which I don't think is a bad idea if you're carrying for self-defense, and attacker manages to get your pistol, they can point it and just pull the trigger and shoot you, right? If you have your gun with a manual safety and they get it out of your holster or get it from you while it still has the manual safety engaged, in the fury, in all the adrenaline going, they may not have the presence of mind, training, tactical memory, and experience to disengage the trigger and fire. They might just pull it and fire, or pull the trigger and realize, it's not firing. What's going on? That nightmare scenario that people imagine for themselves because they think they're the main character in the story and they need to get their gun out and kill a bunch of bad guys really fast. In reality, I'm more concerned with what might happen if the gun gets free from me, because I'm not John Wick. I'm not some fictional character who is impervious and will never have their weapon taken away from them. Hope it never happens. I train to not let it happen. Might happen. I'd like one barrier for an attacker who might get my pistol. One more barrier for them to effectively fire the gun off at me. So that they get the gun, have manual safety on, and they just point and pull the trigger, press the trigger, and it doesn't go off because the manual safety's on. It might give me a second more to get away and get to them if I know the safety's on, and try to get back in that fight. That's something that concerns me more. I am not an operator. I am not an assassin. I am not out there looking to get bad guys. I have this as a part of my training for self and community defense. I hope I never have to use it. I've never gotten close to using it. I try to scale things up. I came to weapons training after about 2.5 decades of hand-to-hand training. That's my go-to. That's where I have more reps in. That's what I will always go to if I'm forced to defend myself kinetically and physically first, before even considering drawing the weapon, right? I'm not going to that first. I have an abundance of caution in using the even just carrying the firearm, even just training with it, right? So I think it's perfectly fine to carry modern pistols without manual safeties. Obviously, be very, very careful. Holster correctly. Get good quality holsters. Pay attention to the rules of firearm safety. Always be looking when you reholster. Like be very, very careful, and you can do it just fine. Okay. With that said, I personally, still as a new carrier, feel most comfortable carrying a gun with a manual safety, and I think that's fine. I think it's fine if you want an added level of security or safety, right, along with training your senses. I think that is perfectly fine. And here's one last thing I'll say. I won't put them out there, but of the few friends I have, let's just put it this way. I don't want to fetishize experience. I want to dramatize things. But I want to minimize things. Of the few friends I have who have, let's say, real experience using firearms in the field, in real life, and have used them effectively against machines, buildings, and people. Those are the people that I have never heard trepidation or worry about carrying with a manual safety. They're just not concerned about it. The reality is many, for better, for worse, not endorsing military, not endorsing police. The reality is people whose jobs have required carrying guns, whether they're pistols or rifles, for decades and decades, have carried those in the field with manual safeties, and somehow they've managed to kill millions of people with firearms that have safeties on. I think you can kill people with firearms that have manual safeties. Hopefully you never have to. Hopefully no one ever comes after you. But you can clearly use them effectively. People who pretend they can't are overcompensating. They're ignoring real-time use of these types of weapons. And in reality, I have friends who have told me, when they got out, they themselves weren't. It took them a while to get comfortable carrying a pistol without a manual safety. They were not worried. They had real-world experience. For better or for worse, regret, no regret, they were real warriors. They have put real time in. And maybe we'll never put the time they do in, but if you put real time in and real training in, you're going to have a more realistic outlook about things. You're going to have a more sober outlook on the dangers one might face, a more realistic assessment of the dangers you would face. You won't just think of yourself as like some type of main character in a movie you watch or a video game you watch. And whether or not you carry a pistol with manual safety, you won't be so obsessed with looking like a tough guy or girl because you don't use a safety or don't carry one. So that's my take. That's why I still prefer it. I think it's fine to do it either way. In any case, these are very dangerous things. It's a very big responsibility. Train a lot. Do the best you can. A lot of training is going to come outside of live fire. It's without ammunition. Do everything you can to train your reflexes, to learn, to have fun. Because if you enjoy it, you'll get more reps in. Train everything. Try to see. And try not to become a paranoid, and just trust in the training. If you put the training in anything in life, I think it'll pay off. I don't have experience as a gunfighter. I hope I never have experience as a gunfighter. I have experiences in other things, and so far, using this meat machine that carries around the electricity inside of it, what I train mentally with visualization and physically ends up being what I can do under duress. If I don't do it, successfully under duress because I haven't trained it enough. So thank you all for watching. Thank you all for training. Feel free to leave comments and argue and debate. Thanks for supporting the Patreon. We aim for self-defense. We got much more coming your way. Appreciate you all very much.